If someone betrays you in the worst way possible, do you walk away or do you plan the perfect revenge? Because what I did might sound insane, but after what my sister and my husband did to me 30 years ago, I needed them to feel exactly what I felt. My name is Nanny. I'm 71 years old now, and this is the story of how I discovered the two people I loved most in the world were living a double life behind my back, and how I orchestrated the most elaborate revenge plot that left everyone speechless. So I had been married to Frank for 6 years. 6 whole years. We met at a church social when I was 35. Got married pretty quickly, and honestly, I thought we had a good relationship. He was a hard-working man, a factory foreman, always knew how to make me laugh. My younger sister, Dorothy, was my best friend. We grew up super close, only 2 years apart. She was the person I called when something good happened, the person I trusted with everything. The three of us spent so much time together: Sunday dinners after church, summer picnics, card games on Friday nights. Frank and Dorothy got along great, which I loved. I thought it was wonderful that my husband and my sister were close. I actually encouraged it. I thought I was lucky. But about 8 months before everything happened, things started feeling off. Small things at first. Frank started working late more often. He would come home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked about it, he said it was probably from a lady at work who hugged him goodbye. Reasonable, right? Dorothy started acting strange too. She would cancel plans with me last minute. She stopped calling me as much. When we did get together, she seemed distracted, always rushing off somewhere. I asked her if everything was okay, and she said she was just busy with her job at the telephone company. Again, seemed reasonable. Then one evening, Frank said he had to work a night shift, extra money for overtime, he said. He kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me, and left. I decided to surprise Dorothy with some homemade cookies since I was alone for the evening. We used to do that all the time when we were younger. I drove to her house, which was only 10 minutes away. I had a spare key because we were that close. I let myself in quietly because I wanted to surprise her. And that's when I heard it. His laugh. Frank's laugh, coming from her bedroom. I stood there frozen in her living room. My brain couldn't process what was happening. I heard her laugh too, that familiar giggle. Then I heard other sounds, sounds that made my stomach drop. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I just stood there shaking, trying not to be sick. Then I quietly left. I sat in my car outside our house for probably an hour, just crying. My whole world had just shattered into a million pieces. I drove home in complete shock. When Frank came home the next morning acting like everything was normal, talking about his long night at the factory, I said nothing. I just watched him lie to my face. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention. I checked the phone bill. I saw calls between them at all hours. I found receipts in his wallet for a motel out by the highway. I discovered this had been going on for over a year. An entire year. While I was cooking his favorite meals, they were sneaking around behind my back. While Dorothy was helping me can vegetables from my garden, she was sleeping with him. The betrayal from Frank hurt, but the betrayal from Dorothy destroyed me in a completely different way. This was my sister, my own blood, the person who knew everything about me, who knew about my struggles, my fears, my dreams, and she chose to do this anyway. I thought about confronting them immediately.
I imagined yelling, crying, throwing his things out on the lawn. But then something else took over, this cold, calculated anger. I realized that just confronting them wouldn't be enough. They would apologize, maybe cry, make excuses. Frank would probably blame our marriage. Dorothy would probably say it just happened. And then what? I leave. They end up together anyway. And I'm just the pathetic wife who got cheated on by her husband and sister. Everyone would pity me at church. They would move on with their lives while I was left picking up the pieces. No, I wanted them to feel what I felt. I wanted them humiliated. I wanted everyone to know what they did. So I started planning. First, I acted completely normal. I pretended I had no idea. I smiled at Frank. I called Dorothy. I kept everything exactly the same. This was the hardest part, sitting at dinner with both of them, laughing at their jokes while knowing what they were doing. But I had to. For my plan to work, they couldn't suspect anything. Then I told Frank I wanted to renew our vows. I said that after 6 years, I wanted to celebrate our marriage with a big ceremony. I made it romantic. I cried a little and told him how much he meant to me. He looked uncomfortable at first, probably because of the guilt, but he agreed. He actually seemed touched. He had no idea what was coming. I started planning this elaborate vow renewal ceremony. I booked the church hall, I hired a photographer, I ordered food from the best caterer in town. I invited everyone, our families, all our friends from church, his coworkers from the factory, my friends from the ladies' auxiliary, distant relatives. I made it huge. I spent thousands of dollars from our savings account. Frank thought I was going overboard, but I convinced him it was important to me. Then came the most important part. I asked Dorothy to be my matron of honor. She hesitated when I asked her. I saw the guilt flash across her face for just a second, but then she said yes. She probably thought she had to. How would it look if she said no to being her own sister's matron of honor? So she agreed, and I watched her squirm every time we talked about the ceremony, every time we went shopping for her dress, every time I talked about how much I loved Frank and how lucky I was to be married to him. I could see it eating her alive, but she couldn't back out. She was trapped, and it was beautiful. She tried to have a conversation with me once. We were at my kitchen table addressing invitations. I was talking about how Frank was my rock, and I couldn't wait to spend the rest of my life with him. She got quiet, and then she said something like, "Are you sure you want to do this big ceremony?" She said, "Maybe Frank and I should just do something small at the church with the pastor instead." She tried to talk me out of it, but I insisted. I said I wanted everyone there. I wanted it to be big and memorable, something no one would ever forget. And I meant it. Frank also tried to back out a few times. He said maybe we should postpone. He said maybe it was too expensive. He said maybe we didn't need something so fancy. But I cried and told him it was my dream. I told him I had already put so much work into it. I told him it would break my heart if we canceled. So he agreed to go through with it. They both did. They were both trapped in my plan, and they didn't even know it. The day of the ceremony finally came. It was a gorgeous Saturday afternoon in late September of 1994. Perfect weather. Sunny, but not too hot. The kind of day you dream about for outdoor events. The church hall looked perfect. Flowers everywhere from the church ladies' gardens. Roses and carnations and daisies, decorations on every table. A beautiful setup at the front where Frank and I would stand. It looked lovely. Everyone started arriving. They were all dressed up in Sunday best. The women in nice dresses and the men in suits and ties. My parents were crying happy tears from the moment they arrived. They kept telling me how beautiful everything was, how happy they were, how proud they were of Frank and me. Frank's parents were the same. So proud, so excited, talking about what a good couple we were and how much they loved me like a daughter. All our friends were excited, taking photos with their cameras, complimenting the decorations, talking about how romantic everything was. His co-workers from the factory were there, my friends from the auxiliary, our church friends, distant aunts and uncles, cousins, everyone we knew, all dressed up and ready to celebrate. Dorothy was standing next to me in her matron of honor dress. I had picked it out specifically, a light blue dress that looked nice on her. She looked nervous, but presentable. Her hair was done up. She had put on makeup. She kept fidgeting with her bouquet. She kept looking around the room. She looked like she wanted to run away, but she couldn't. Frank stood at the front in his suit, a nice dark suit with a burgundy tie. His hair was slicked back. He had gotten a fresh haircut the day before. He looked handsome. He was smiling at me as I walked down the aisle with my father. That smile I used to love. That smile I used to trust. That smile that hid so many lies. I walked down the aisle, holding a bouquet of white roses from my garden. My father was walking me, even though this wasn't technically a wedding. He was so happy. He squeezed my hand and told me he loved me. I felt bad for what I was about to do to him and my mother, but it had to be done. The organ played. Everyone stood. They were all watching me with these big smiles on their faces, tears in their eyes, so happy for me, so excited to witness this beautiful moment. It was like a movie, picture perfect, exactly how I planned it. I reached the front and stood across from Frank. He was still smiling. He reached for my hands, and I let him take them. His hands felt clammy. He was nervous. The pastor welcomed everyone and started talking about love and commitment and marriage, about trust and partnership and growing together. I watched Frank's face while the pastor talked. He was nodding along, trying to look like the perfect husband. Then it was time for the speeches. Dorothy went first, as matron of honor. I watched her step up to the microphone that we had borrowed from the church. I watched her unfold a piece of paper with shaking hands, and I watched her give this whole speech about sisterhood and love and how happy she was for us. She talked about growing up together, about how we used to play house when we were little, and I would always be the wife, and she would be my helper. About how she always knew I would find someone special. About how, when I met Frank, she knew he was the one for me. About how perfect we were together. About how much she loved us both. About how excited she was to watch us continue our lives together. The audience smiled and clapped. Some people wiped away tears. Our mother was crying. Frank's mother was crying. Everyone thought it was so sweet, so touching, this beautiful speech from a sister who loved me. And the whole time I was thinking about how she was sleeping with my husband, how every word out of her mouth was a lie, how she was standing there in front of everyone, pretending to be happy for us when she was actively destroying our marriage. She finished her speech, and everyone clapped again. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and hugged me, and I hugged her back, and I smiled.
because I knew what was about to happen. Then it was my turn to speak. I had the microphone. The room got quiet. Everyone was waiting to hear me talk about my love for Frank, waiting to hear me talk about our beautiful relationship and how excited I was to spend the rest of my life with him. I looked around at all the faces. My parents sitting in the front row holding hands, my brother, my aunts and uncles, Frank's parents, Frank's siblings, all our friends from church, all these people who had no idea what was really happening.
I started speaking. My voice was steady. I had practiced this so many times that I wasn't nervous. I said I wanted to thank everyone for coming to celebrate with us today. I said it meant so much to have all our loved ones here. I said that marriage is built on trust, and trust is the most important thing in any relationship. Frank was smiling at me from the front. Dorothy was standing beside me, frozen. I could see her holding her breath. Then I said that unfortunately, trust had been broken, and I couldn't continue this ceremony in good faith. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. People looked confused. They looked at each other, trying to figure out what I meant. Frank's smile started fading. I saw his face change. I saw him realize something was very wrong. I told everyone that for the past year, my husband had been having an affair. The gasps were immediate. People started whispering. Frank's face went completely white. He started shaking his head. He tried to say something, but no words came out. I kept talking. I had the microphone and I wasn't done. I said that the affair wasn't with a stranger or a woman from work. It wasn't with someone from another town or someone he met at a bar. It was with someone much closer. Someone standing right here at this ceremony. Someone who was supposed to love me. Someone who was supposed to protect me. And then I turned to Dorothy. I told everyone that my own sister, my matron of honor, the person I trusted most in the world besides my husband, had been sleeping with Frank for over a year. The room erupted. People started yelling. Someone screamed. I heard my mother start sobbing. I heard Frank's father shout something. Dorothy's face went pale. She dropped her bouquet. Frank tried to say something, but I kept talking. I had prepared a display board. Remember, this was 1994. We didn't have computers and screens like they do now, but I had made this big poster board with photographs glued to it, photos that the private detective had taken. I had it covered with the sheet behind me. I pulled the sheet off. Photos of Frank and Dorothy together appeared for everyone to see. Photos of them holding hands, walking down Main Street. Photos of them kissing in his truck in a parking lot. Photos of them going into the Shady Pines Motel together. Photos of them leaving Dorothy's house early in the morning, all with dates written underneath them. Undeniable proof. The room was in complete chaos. People were yelling, crying, screaming. My father stood up and started walking toward Frank. My brother grabbed him and held him back. Dorothy started crying and tried to leave, but I grabbed her arm. I told her to stay right where she was. I told her she didn't get to run away from this. I told everyone that I had spent weeks planning this moment, that I had known for months, and I wanted them both to feel a fraction of the humiliation I felt, that I wanted everyone they knew to see exactly who they really were, that they had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I wanted them to face consequences for once in their lives.
Frank tried to defend himself. He tried to say I was crazy, that I had misunderstood, that the photos weren't what they looked like. But the evidence was right there on the board behind us. His own face in photos, date showing him at the motel when he said he was working night shift. He had nothing, no defense, no excuse, just lies that nobody believed. Dorothy just stood there crying with her hands over her face. She couldn't even look at anyone. She kept saying she was sorry over and over again, but nobody wanted to hear it.
My father finally broke free from my brother and lunged at Frank. He grabbed him by the collar and started yelling in his face, called him every name you can imagine. Frank's father had to pull my dad away. Frank's mother was screaming at both Frank and Dorothy. She was crying and yelling about how ashamed she was, how she couldn't believe her son would do something like this, how she loved me like a daughter and he had destroyed everything. My mother was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. My brother was holding her. She kept looking at Dorothy with this look of complete betrayal. She kept saying, "How could you?" over and over again. Our aunts were surrounding her, trying to comfort her. Dorothy's face was buried in her hands. She finally tried to run, but I wasn't letting her off that easy. I told her she owed everyone an explanation. I asked her how long she had been sleeping with my husband. She couldn't answer. I asked her if it was worth it, if destroying our family was worth some man who was clearly willing to cheat on his wife. She just cried. Frank tried to come toward me, tried to grab my hands, tried to talk to me, but I stepped back. I took off my wedding ring and threw it at his feet. The ring bounced and rolled across the floor. Someone gasped. I told him I had already filed for divorce, and he would be receiving the papers on Monday morning, that my lawyer had everything documented, that I had protected myself financially, that I had moved half our money to my own account and he wasn't getting any of it, that he could keep the house because I never wanted to see it again. I told Dorothy that she was dead to me, that I never wanted to see her face again for the rest of my life, that she had destroyed our family. For what? For a man who was willing to cheat on his wife with her own sister? A man who clearly had no loyalty to anyone. A man who would obviously cheat on her too eventually. I asked her if it was worth it, if their secret meetings at that dirty motel were worth losing her sister, her family, her reputation. She didn't answer. She just kept crying. I told my parents I was sorry they had to find out this way, but they deserved to know who their youngest daughter really was. I told Frank's parents I was sorry for embarrassing them, but their son deserved to be exposed. Then I thanked everyone for coming. I said that even though the ceremony hadn't gone as expected, the food was already prepared and they were welcome to stay. I told them everything was already paid for with money from the joint account that Frank had also been using to take Dorothy to motels. And then I walked out. I walked out of that church hall with my head held high while everyone was staring. Some people were still yelling. Some were crying. Some were just standing there in shock. But I didn't look back. I just walked straight out the door. My best friend Marjorie and my brother followed me out. They had been sitting near the back, and they immediately came after me. We got to Marjorie's car and just drove away. We didn't have a destination. We just drove away from that place, away from Frank and Dorothy and all of it. I sat in the back seat and finally broke down. I had been holding it together for so long, playing the part, acting normal, planning everything. And now it was done. Now everyone knew, and I could finally fall apart. Marjorie pulled over and climbed into the back seat with me and just held me while I sobbed. My brother sat in the driver's seat crying too. We ended up at Marjorie's house. She made me tea and we just sat there. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to process anything. I just wanted to sit there and exist. My phone was ringing off the hook, but I ignored it all.
The aftermath was brutal, but also satisfying in a strange way. Frank tried to contact me hundreds of times, phone calls at all hours. He showed up at Marjorie's house, but she wouldn't let him in. He sent flowers, he sent letters, long letters where he tried to explain himself and apologize, where he said he made a mistake and he loved me and wanted to work things out. I didn't read them. I gave them all to my lawyer. He tried to use our friends to get to me. He would call them, asking them to tell me to call him. But most of our friends from church had chosen my side after seeing the evidence, after witnessing what happened at the ceremony. They wanted nothing to do with him. Dorothy tried to apologize through my parents, but I refused to speak to her. I told my parents I didn't want to hear her name. I didn't want updates about her. I didn't want to know anything about her life. As far as I was concerned, she didn't exist anymore. She was dead to me. My family cut her off completely. My parents were devastated, not just because of what she did, but because they felt like they lost both their daughters in one day. My mother called me crying several times, begging me to reconsider, saying that Dorothy was my sister and family was supposed to forgive. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. What she did was unforgivable. My father was different. He was angry. He told me he was proud of what I did at the ceremony. He said Dorothy deserved everything she got and more. He said he couldn't even look at her. He told her she wasn't welcome at family gatherings anymore. My mother struggled with that. She wanted to maintain a relationship with both of us, but I made it clear that if Dorothy was invited to something, I wouldn't be there. So my parents had to choose, and most of the time they chose me. My brother completely cut Dorothy off too. He was so angry with her. He went to her house and told her exactly what he thought of her, told her she had destroyed our family, told her she was ashamed to be related to her. Dorothy apparently tried to explain herself to him, but he didn't want to hear it. Our extended family took sides. Most of them sided with me. Aunts and uncles who had watched us grow up couldn't believe Dorothy would do something like that. They stopped talking to her, they stopped inviting her to holidays. A few relatives tried to stay neutral, but it was hard. How do you stay neutral when someone does something that terrible? Frank's family apologized to me over and over. His mother called crying multiple times. She said she was horrified and ashamed of what her son had done. She said she had always loved me and thought of me as a daughter. She said she couldn't believe Frank would throw away our marriage and hurt me like that. She said she didn't raise him to be that kind of man. His father called too. He apologized and said I deserved better. He said Frank had disappointed the entire family. Some of Frank's relatives reached out to say they supported me. His aunt brought me a casserole and a note saying I was always welcome at family gatherings, even though Frank and I were getting divorced. His cousin called to say she always thought I was too good for Frank anyway. It was strange getting support from his family, but it felt good. It felt like validation that what he did was wrong and people could see that. Our mutual friends had to pick sides. Most picked mine after they saw the evidence, after witnessing what happened at the ceremony. They couldn't believe Frank and Dorothy had been lying to everyone for over a year. They felt betrayed too in a way.
They had spent time with both of them, had invited them to dinners and parties, had trusted them, and it was all built on lies. A few people stayed neutral. They said they didn't want to get involved in drama, that they cared about everyone and didn't want to choose. I respected that, but I also knew it meant we probably wouldn't stay close. Because how can you be friends with someone who stays friends with the people who destroyed you? A couple people actually ended up staying friends with Frank and Dorothy. One of Frank's bowling buddies said that people make mistakes and everyone deserves forgiveness, that what Frank did was wrong, but he shouldn't lose all his friends over it. I cut that person out of my life immediately. If you can excuse betrayal like that, you're not someone I want in my life. The talk around town was intense. This was a small community and everyone knew everyone's business. People were gossiping about it for months. At the grocery store, at church, at the beauty parlor, everyone was talking about what happened. I got phone calls from people I barely knew who had heard about it and wanted to know if it was true. I stopped answering the phone for a while because it was too much. Some people at church were supportive. They brought me casseroles and called to check on me. The pastor's wife was especially kind. She told me I had every right to expose the truth and that what they did was a sin that needed to be brought to light. Other people at church were more judgmental. They said I should have handled it privately, that I made a spectacle, that it wasn't Christian to humiliate people like that. I stopped going to that church. I found a new one across town where nobody knew my story.
The divorce process was long, but straightforward. My lawyer was excellent. We had all the evidence we needed to prove adultery. Back then, that really mattered in court. It meant I was entitled to more in the divorce settlement. Frank tried to fight it at first. His lawyer tried to argue that we should split everything 50-50, regardless of what happened, but my lawyer shut that down quickly. We had to go through all our assets, the house, our cars, our savings. Everything we had built together over 6 years had to be divided. It was painful going through it all. Every item reminded me of our life together. The furniture we picked out, the dishes we got as wedding presents, the television we bought together. All of it tainted now. I didn't want the house. Too many memories, too much history. We sold it and split the money. I used my half to buy a small house on the other side of town and started over. New furniture from garage sales and thrift stores, new decorations, a completely fresh start. I got more than half of our savings because of the infidelity. My lawyer argued that Frank had used our joint money to fund his affair. All those motel rooms had come from our shared accounts, money I had contributed to, money that should have gone toward our future. The judge agreed. Frank had to pay me back for that, and then some. We had to split Frank's pension from the factory. I got half of what he had earned during our marriage. My lawyer made sure of that. She made sure Frank faced financial consequences for what he did. He tried to argue that it wasn't fair, but life isn't fair. He should have thought about that before he cheated. The whole process took about 6 months. 6 months of lawyers and paperwork and court dates. 6 months of having to be in the same room as Frank while we discussed dividing our life. 6 months of reliving the betrayal over and over again. But finally, it was done. The divorce was finalized in the spring of 1995. I got the official papers in the mail saying our marriage was dissolved, that we were no longer legally bound to each other, that I was free. I sat in my new little house and cried, not because I was sad, but because it was really over. That chapter of my life was closed forever. Dorothy and Frank didn't end up together. which is almost funny when I think about it now. Turns out their relationship was only exciting when it was a secret, when it was forbidden and they had to sneak around. Once it became public and they actually faced consequences, it fell apart almost immediately. I heard through the grapevine that they tried to date for a few weeks after everything happened, but it didn't work. Frank apparently resented Dorothy for being part of the reason his life blew up. Dorothy apparently realized that Frank was just a man who cheats on his wife and couldn't be trusted. They had built their whole relationship on lies and betrayal, and once that foundation was gone, there was nothing left. They broke up badly, according to mutual acquaintances. Frank apparently blamed Dorothy for everything, said she seduced him, said it was her fault. Dorothy apparently told people that Frank had promised he was going to leave me anyway, and she believed him. They both tried to paint themselves as victims. It was pathetic. Frank tried to get me back even after the divorce was finalized. He showed up at my new house one day. This was probably 6 months after everything. He knocked on my door, and when I opened it, he was standing there with flowers. He said he had made the biggest mistake of his life, and he was sorry. He said he loved me and always loved me, and what happened with Dorothy didn't mean anything. He said he wanted another chance. He said he would do anything to fix things. I looked at him standing there on my porch, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, nothing. I told him to leave and never come back. I told him if he showed up again, I would call the police. I closed the door in his face and watched through the window as he stood there for a few minutes before finally leaving. That was the last time I saw him. Dorothy moved away not long after the divorce was final. I heard through my mother that she couldn't handle living in the same town anymore. Everyone knew what she did. People whispered about her at the grocery store. Her friends had abandoned her. She couldn't go anywhere without people staring. So she moved, packed up and left, moved to Ohio or Indiana or somewhere far away. Started over where nobody knew her story. My mother was heartbroken about that. She cried to me about how she had lost her daughter, how Dorothy had moved away and rarely called, how she missed her. I felt bad for my mother. I really did. But I also couldn't bring myself to care about Dorothy's well-being. She made her choices. She had to live with the consequences.
I heard through family over the years that Dorothy eventually remarried, had a couple of kids, built a new life far away from here. We never spoke again. Not once in the 30 years since that day at the church hall. My mother would sometimes try to tell me about her new life, about her children, but I would stop her. I didn't want to know. It was too painful. My mother passed away about 10 years ago. Dorothy came back for the funeral. That was the first time I had seen her in over 20 years. She looked old, worn down. She tried to talk to me at the service, but I walked away. I couldn't do it. Even after all those years, I couldn't forgive her. My brother told her to leave me alone. She cried through the whole funeral, but never approached me again. After my mother died, there was no reason for Dorothy and me to ever cross paths again. My father had passed a few years before that. The only family gatherings now are with my kids and grandkids. Dorothy isn't part of that world. She's just a person I used to know a long time ago. People have asked me over the years if I regret the way I handled it, if I think the public humiliation was too much, if I should have just confronted them privately and moved on with dignity. I've had 30 years to think about this, 30 years to look back on what I did. And honestly, no. I don't regret it at all. They humiliated me in private for over a year. Every time they snuck around behind my back, they were humiliating me. Every time they lied to my face, they were making a fool of me. I was the joke, and I didn't even know it. So yes, I humiliated them publicly. I exposed them in front of everyone they knew. I made sure their actions had consequences. And I don't feel bad about that. Could I have been the bigger person? Sure, I could have confronted them privately. I could have quietly divorced Frank and cut off Dorothy and moved on with my life. But where's the justice in that? Where is the accountability? They betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I made sure everyone knew exactly who they were. I made sure their reputations matched their actions. Some people back then called me crazy, said I went too far, said I was bitter and vindictive. Maybe I was. Maybe public humiliation was extreme. But you know what? They earned it. Every second of embarrassment they felt at that church hall, they earned through months of lying and cheating and betraying someone who loved them. Now I'm 71 years old. I rebuilt my life after that divorce. It took time, a lot of time, but I did it. I eventually remarried about 10 years after the divorce. A good man named Harold, who I met at my new church. We had a wonderful marriage for 15 years before he passed from cancer. He knew my whole story, and he never judged me for what I did. He said Frank and Dorothy got what they deserved. I have children from my marriage to Harold. I have grandchildren. I have a full life, a good life. A life that has nothing to do with Frank or Dorothy or any of that mess from 30 years ago. But I'm not going to lie and say it didn't change me. It did. It changed how I see people. It changed how much I trust. It made me more careful, more guarded. And maybe that's not a bad thing. The hardest part all these years later isn't even missing Frank or Dorothy. It's the loss of what I thought I had. It's the loss of that innocence. Before that happened, I trusted people. I believed people when they said they loved me. I thought loyalty meant something. Now I know better. Now I know that people can look you in the eye and tell you they love you while betraying you in the worst possible way. Sometimes even now, all these decades later, I'll see something that reminds me of Dorothy, a song we used to sing together, a recipe we used to make. And for a split second, I think about calling her before I remember that we don't do that anymore, that we'll never do that again. And it still hurts. Not as sharp as it used to, but it still hurts. But I survived. I did more than survive. I built a beautiful life. I raised good children. I am a grandmother now to 5 wonderful grandkids. I have friends who love me. I have a community at my church. I'm stronger because of what happened. I'm more independent. I'm more careful about who I trust, but I'm not broken. They tried to break me, but I refused to let them. So if you're going through something similar, if someone you love has betrayed you, just know that you get to decide how you respond. You don't have to be the bigger person if that doesn't feel right. You don't have to forgive people who aren't truly sorry. You
don't have to make things easy for people who made your life hell. You get to protect yourself. You get to set boundaries. You get to choose yourself. You get to demand accountability. You get to expose the truth if that's what you need to heal. And you don't have to feel guilty about any of it. Even now, 30 years later, I stand by what I did. What Frank and Dorothy did was unforgivable. What they did changed my life forever. What they did destroyed a family. And I made sure they understood that. I made sure everyone understood that. I made sure there were real consequences for their actions. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would do it exactly the same way. Because at the end of the day, betrayal has consequences. Actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences need to be public. Sometimes the only way to get justice is to expose the truth for everyone to see. Sometimes the only way to take your power back is to refuse to protect the people who hurt you. Looking back now as a 71-year-old woman, I can see things more clearly than I could back then. I can see that what I did wasn't just about revenge. It was about refusing to be silenced. It was about refusing to carry their shame for them. They did something shameful, and they wanted to keep it hidden. They wanted to protect their reputations while destroying my life, and I refused to let that happen. In those days, back in the 1990s, women were expected to handle these things quietly, to divorce privately, and move on without making a fuss, to protect the family's reputation even when family members had destroyed it. I was supposed to be dignified and proper and quiet about my pain. Well, I wasn't quiet, and I'm glad I wasn't. I've lived long enough now to see how these things usually play out. I've seen friends go through divorces where they handled everything privately, where they protected their cheating husbands' reputations, where they quietly packed their bags and left without telling anyone why. And you know what happened? Those men faced no consequences. They remarried quickly. They maintained their friendships and their standing in the community. The wives were the ones who suffered alone. But Frank faced consequences. He lost his reputation in our town. He lost most of his friends. His family was ashamed of him. He had to live with everyone knowing what he did. And that mattered. That was important. Not just for me, but for justice. For the principle that you can't treat people like that and get away with it. Dorothy faced consequences too. She lost her family. She lost her home. She had to start over in a new place where nobody knew her. And while part of me feels sad about that, the bigger part of me knows she earned every bit of it. She made her choices. She knew what she was doing was wrong, and she did it anyway. For over a year, she looked me in the eye and lied. She deserved to face the results of those choices. My mother, before she died, tried one more time to get me to reconcile with Dorothy. She was in the hospital, knew she didn't have much time left. She asked me to forgive my sister. She said life was too short to hold grudges. She said Dorothy had paid enough for her mistakes. And I told my mother that I loved her. But no. Some things are unforgivable. Some betrayals are too deep. And I had built a good life without Dorothy in it. I didn't need her to forgive her to be happy.
My mother cried. She said she had hoped before she died to see her daughters reconciled. But I couldn't give her that. Even for my dying mother, I couldn't pretend to forgive something that fundamental. Dorothy didn't just make a mistake. She didn't accidentally hurt me. She made a choice over and over again for more than a year to betray me in the worst possible way. That's not something you can just forgive and forget.
After my mother passed, my brother told me that Dorothy had asked about me at the funeral, had asked if there was any chance we could talk, any chance we could heal our relationship. And I said no. 30 years later, and my answer was still no. Because some things break so completely that they can't be fixed. And that's okay. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to forgive everyone. Sometimes you just have to accept that something is broken and move on. I think about Frank sometimes, too. I heard he remarried eventually. Some woman from the next town over who didn't know his history. I heard they divorced after a few years. Apparently, he cheated on her, too. Some people never change. I wasn't surprised. A man who will cheat with your sister is a man who will cheat on anyone. That woman learned the hard way what I already knew. Last I heard, Frank was living alone in some apartment near the factory where he used to work. He's retired now. I saw him once, about 5 years ago, at the hardware store. I was buying paint for my guest bedroom, and I turned around and there he was. An old man now, bald, overweight, tired looking. He saw me and his face went pale. He opened his mouth like he was gonna say something, but I just turned around and walked away. After 30 years, I still had nothing to say to him. My life turned out better than I ever could have imagined back in 1994 when my world was falling apart. I married Harold, and we had such a beautiful life together. He was everything Frank wasn't. Honest, loyal, kind. He loved me completely and never gave me a single reason to doubt him. When he got sick with cancer, I took care of him until the end. And even though losing him was one of the hardest things I've ever been through, I was grateful for every year we had together. My children are grown now, with families of their own, good kids, good parents to my grandchildren. They know the story of what happened with Frank and Dorothy. I told them when they were old enough to understand. I wanted them to know that you don't have to accept betrayal, that you can stand up for yourself, that actions have consequences. They've told me they're proud of what I did, that they think I was brave. My grandchildren are the lights of my life. The oldest is 16 now. The youngest is 8. They call me Nanny, and I see them as often as I can. We bake cookies together, we play games, we go to the park. They don't know about the drama from before they were born. To them, I'm just Nanny, just their grandmother who loves them, and that's exactly how I want it. I volunteer at the library now. I'm part of a quilting group. I play cards with friends every Thursday. I go to church on Sundays. I have a good life, a peaceful life,
A life full of people who love me and would never betray me the way Frank and Dorothy did. And I built this life myself. I didn't let what they did destroy me. I took that pain and that anger and I used it to build something better. People in my current life don't know my history unless I choose to tell them. They just know me as Nanny, as the nice lady who volunteers at the library, as the woman who makes the best apple pie in the quilting group. They don't know about Frank or Dorothy or that day at the church hall. And that's fine. That's not who I am anymore. That's just something that happened to me a long time ago. But I'm not going to pretend it didn't shape me. It did. It made me stronger, but also more guarded. It made me independent, but also less trusting. It taught me that people can smile to your face while stabbing you in the back. It taught me that family doesn't always mean loyalty. It taught me that you can't rely on anyone but yourself. Those are hard lessons, but important ones.
And it taught me that you have the right to defend yourself, to stand up for yourself, to expose the truth even when people say you should stay quiet, to demand justice even when people say you should be the bigger person, to protect your own interests even when people say you're being selfish. Those are lessons I've carried with me for 30 years, and they've served me well. I'm not going to end this by saying I've completely moved on or that I never think about it anymore, because that would be a lie. I do think about it. Not every day anymore, not even every week, but sometimes. Sometimes I'll be at church and I'll remember sitting in the pews with Frank and Dorothy on either side of me, having no idea what they were doing. Sometimes I'll be baking, and I'll remember teaching Dorothy how to make pie crust when we were young. Sometimes I'll be alone in the evening, and I'll remember what it felt like to discover the betrayal. But those memories don't control me anymore. They're just part of my story, part of what made me who I am. And who I am is a 71-year-old woman who refused to be a victim, who stood up for herself when it mattered, who demanded accountability when everyone else wanted her to be quiet, who built a beautiful life out of the ashes of betrayal. So that's my story. That's how I discovered my husband and sister were having an affair 30 years ago and how I made them stand up in front of everyone at my fake vow renewal ceremony while I exposed them. That's how I took my power back and refused to be silenced. That's how I got justice in the only way that felt right to me. And if you're going through something similar right now, no matter how old you are, just know that you have options. You don't have to handle betrayal the way other people think you should. You get to decide what justice looks like for you. You get to decide whether to forgive or not forgive. You get to decide how to move forward. And whatever you decide, as long as it's what you truly need, then it's the right decision. I'm 71 years old now,
And I have no regrets about what I did when I was 41. I have no regrets about exposing Frank and Dorothy in front of everyone they knew. I have no regrets about the public humiliation or the way I planned it all out. They betrayed me in the most painful way possible, and I made sure they faced consequences. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. Because at the end of the day, 30 years later, I'm the one who came out on top. I'm the one with the good life and the loving family and the peace of mind. Frank is alone. Dorothy is estranged from half her family. And I'm here, surrounded by people who truly love me, having lived a full and happy life despite what they tried to do to me. So that's my story. That's how I discovered my husband and sister were having an affair 30 years ago, and how I made them stand up in front of everyone at my fake vow renewal ceremony. That's how I took my power back and refused to be silenced. That's how I got justice in the only way that felt right to me. And if you're going through something similar right now, no matter how old you are, just know that you have options. You don't have to handle betrayal the way other people think you should. You get to decide what justice looks like for you. You get to decide whether to forgive or not forgive. You get to decide how to move forward. And whatever you decide, as long as it's what you truly need, then it's the right decision. I'm 71 years old now, and I have no regrets about what I did when I was 41. I have no regrets about exposing Frank and Dorothy in front of everyone they knew. I have no regrets about the public humiliation or the way I planned it all out. They betrayed me in the most painful way possible, and I made sure they faced consequences. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. Because at the end of the day, 30 years later, I'm the one who came out on top. I'm the one with the good life and the loving family and the peace of mind. Frank is alone. Dorothy is estranged from half her family. And I'm here, surrounded by people who truly love me, having lived a full and happy life, despite what they tried to do to me. So if someone betrays you, remember this story. Remember that you have the power to decide how it ends. Remember that you don't have to protect people who hurt you. Remember that the truth is always worth telling, even when people say you should keep quiet. And remember that justice matters, even if it makes some people uncomfortable. That's what I learned 30 years ago at that church hall in front of 200 witnesses. And it's a lesson I'll carry with me for whatever time I have left on this earth. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more true stories like this one.